Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really, really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good morning, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners on the New Books Network. I'm here with my friend and co-host Kimon Fontakidis, who's in Krakow. I'm in Lisbon, and we're with Oliver Webb-Carter, who is the founder of a magazine and website called Aspects of History. And I'm not sure where you are, Oliver, but would you like to introduce yourself a bit in a slightly more detail than the role you've got at the moment? Just to explain a little bit about yourself, just in a minute or two, like where you come from, what your history is.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me on. It's a real honor. I am the co-founder and editor of Aspects of History. So Aspects of History is a magazine, website, and we also do a podcast as well. And it's dedicated to history and historical fiction. And so really what the company does is it's intended to help showcase historians and historical fiction authors as well, because we're very passionate about the fiction side of things. It's often how, it's certainly how I got interested in history through the fiction side. And we launched our first issue of the magazine in December 2020. We publish the magazine both through Amazon, where you'll get Kindle and print version, and then also a PDF on our website with all the bells and whistles, all the color, the images and things like that. And we publish that every other month. And as I said, it's intended to help showcase historians and fiction authors. And I have a background in, as I was saying to you before we started recording, I've worked in the city for nearly 20 years. But prior to that, I was an archeologist. I worked
really? Indiana Jones? Just been watching Indiana Jones with the kids recently, so it's fresh in my...
I've met Indiana Jones. So
which one? The actual Indiana? The actual...
Harrison Ford.
Oh, you met Harrison Ford?
No way. I have.
Wow.
I was very small. It was in Central America, in Belize, where he was filming The Mosquito Coast.
Oh.
And he was lovely. And so, he, of course, he was Han Solo and Indiana Jones.
I know. I mean, are you kidding me? I was trying to explain to my kids. My kids are young, and they've now watched Star Wars, and I'm like, you don't understand. Like, he's Han Solo, and like, you don't understand. This guy hit the jackpot. Like, to get one of those, he had two.
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, he's amazing. He's fantastic. A huge fan of. Yeah. Well, that's of course, Indiana Jones, I think every single archaeologist will say that's why they are interested in archaeology.
That's really
the case for me. Yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean, so much so that I actually returned to Belize in 1995 when I was 18. Between leaving school and going to university. And I worked at Maya Archaeology for 6 months in Belize.
Yeah, because I've actually been. Just this year, I was in Belize for the first time,
great.
There I didn't stay. I stayed down in. I can't even remember. We didn't stay in Belize City. We stayed down in one of the places down south.
Dangriga or
no, Placencia, I think.
I know.
Placencia.
Yes.
Really nice spot. Anyway, there are though. I did notice there are these Mayan. They have like Mayan temples. There are things to do there in terms of, because there's a lot of. So I guess that's what you were on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are hugely significant sites all over Central America, really. But in Belize, there are some wonderful places. I worked on a couple of sites, one of which was quite big, called Xanantaniche, which is the closest large Maya site to Tikal, which is in Guatemala, just over the border in Guatemala.
Right.
Appears in Star Wars, in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that a lot of our listeners are learning stuff they would have not learned any other way.
Yeah, so we'll get to the business stuff soon.
No, I'm interested in the archaeology. I don't want you to leave the archaeology. Tell us about the archaeology. And
Well,
what were you
I
doing?
was
Like, so
working.
you were
well, I
young.
was-
You said you're 18. You're 18.
Yeah, I was 18. So I was about to go to university, to Warwick University, to study ancient history and classical archaeology.
Okay.
I'd studied an ancient history A level, and that was mainly ancient Greece. So classical Athens, that kind of thing. But I wanted to study archaeology as well, and I'd lived, as I'd mentioned when I met Indiana Jones himself about 10 years before. My father was in the army and stationed in Belize, and
Ooh.
and I was at boarding school in England, so I'd come back on the holidays, but I didn't see as much of it as my siblings and my parents did. But I really wanted to return, and because I loved being there when I was there,
Yeah.
and my dad did know some archaeologists from his time 10 years before, and so was able to get in touch with one, and then you speak to one, someone else knows someone else, and so that's what I was doing there. So I worked
But I mean, I have to know, what did you actually do? Obviously, you weren't like swinging, using a whip and swinging from trees.
No,
And stuff like
sadly
that.
not. No, I wasn't battling.
I'm sure you were digging or cleaning something. Did you find
I mean, we had to
anything?
work. Yeah. It was. I mean, I had no academic achievements in
Right.
archaeology. So, and I was working with two universities in Shenantonich. I was working with the University of UCLA,
Yeah.
University of California, Los Angeles, and then further north in a place called Blue Creek, I worked with the University of Texas in San Antonio.
Okay.
And it's just lots of fun for an 18-year-old.
Of course.
Just and so there were lots of fun days. You get up very early. I think we were on site by 6
because it's
a.m.
hot. At hot, you need to do it. Yeah.
I mean, once you get up to Shenantonich, which is a big structure, Maya structure, and it peaks over the canopy of the jungle, and at 6 a.m. the mist is just hovering over the. Oh, it's just. I'll never forget that. But a lot of manual labor, because I didn't. I wasn't really able to. I don't know.
Well, you were 18. You didn't know anything.
Yeah, I was just given a mattock and told to get on with it, basically, which I was very happy with. And then that's what I did, and I loved it actually. Didn't meet many Brits when I was out there. It was mainly the local Belizeans. Belize is it's an extraordinary country. On the coast, you get a lot of the remnants of the slave population, so it's mostly Black Caribbean. And then the further inland you go, you get the remnants of the Maya Indians.
Yeah.
So
I met both there. Definitely. Okay, so this is the base for archaeology, and then you went to university in history. So,
Yes.
And you studied archaeology and history.
I studied ancient history and archaeology at Warwick, and then when I graduated, I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do, but because whilst it sounds like I was dead set on an archaeology career, I think when I left, I got slightly detached from the archaeology because the degree basically was more ancient history.
Right.
And then, but I did fall into a job working for the Museum of London in January 1999, and that's working in London, and it was very un-Indiana Jones-like. It is working on building sites. You're basically going through a process to clear out any archaeological remains, to just tick a box for the Corporation of London before HSBC or RBS decide to stick up a building.
Right.
So we worked on a few interesting sites, but I wouldn't say it was glamorous, particularly not in when it's cold and it's raining.
Right.
And there's no bullwhips or Federers lying around.
Right, exactly. So what did you? So what drove you? So how did you get from doing that to?
Well, the pay is awful as an archaeologist, so I have to be honest. And so I think the salary I was on, and this was in '99, so this is around about, I think I was on around about 12 or 13 grand a year in
Right.
London, and that was at the time, and so. It's not below. I mean, it's around minimum wage, I think, roughly.
Right.
And so I could barely, afford to live. So I decided I had some savings. So I did a technology master's at Nottingham University to learn about IT, and because I could barely send an email, and I got a job once I graduated from that at JP Morgan working in IT support. Um,
Oh,
and I began that job so I think the master's in 2000, that graduated in 2001, and then early 2002, I got the job at JP Morgan. I started in '02 and left IT support in about 2010. So
okay.
I loved it. It was a great job when you've got a bunch of people similar age. It's a bit of a team atmosphere.
Yeah.
And you got out on working on trading floors and in the banking floors as well. It was lots of fun, and particularly before the crash, where working in an investment bank was, I guess, it's changed a huge amount, I think, particularly after the crash. But before then, it was a little bit more of I wouldn't, relaxed is the wrong word. It's not like that, but it was less formalities, and that had its advantages and, as we all know, disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun to work at. And then I changed job in about 2010 and moved closer to the business, working in a role called change management, which involved basically helping bankers and traders negotiate the firm itself, because JP Morgan is such a vast, JP Morgan Chase, such
Right.
a
Right.
vast
Right. Right.
firm.
Right.
It has a huge amount of bureaucracy, so we would our organization, the change management team that I joined, was essentially set up to enable the bank to negotiate itself. So we'd help. So if a trader needed a new piece of market data software, we would negotiate that request through all its approvals and very boring stuff like that.
With the organization itself.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a management job doing that. Added to that, I was involved with managing the assistant population for various parts of the investment bank, which was far more challenging. And that's the administrative assistants for bankers and traders. Because
Okay.
obviously you're then dealing with human beings who are
Yes.
and so I
That's
had
where the
quite
problems start.
indeed. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then I moved from that in about 2016 and joined the controls management organization.
Wow,
And
so you were for a long time in JP Morgan, like
yeah,
forever, like 20 years, 30 years, or I don't know. So
mm,
like,
yeah, I left in 2020.
oh, wow.
Yeah. Um, the controls management is in the wake of the financial crash. Compliance very much were stepping back and becoming I think more clearly a third line detachment from the business itself. Tell me if you're bored by this or um,
Yeah, don't go too far. I mean, I think we're getting the highlight of it. I mean, basically, you went through these jobs here in JP Morgan, but it's interesting because you did actually switch within. You went from IT support to actually quite different stuff, to this to
yeah.
change management, to this people management stuff. But you weren't ever doing like the actual finance. So you weren't doing any trading or financial
No, no,
analysis or anything like that.
no. They very wisely didn't let me anywhere near that kind of thing. I would, yeah. It's strange, having had JP Morgan on my CV for so long, but when it comes to finance and and economics. I probably know a little bit more about it in my current job than I was at JP Morgan. I studied ancient history. That gives an indication of where my kind of brain power, is most comfortable. Numbers I'm less comfortable with.
So
and I've got
Go
a
ahead.
question just about this business of the decision to quit. Did it and do something completely different? Did that build up over time, or was there like a moment when you walked into the office and thought, "I can't do this anymore"? Because I think that's something that a lot of people, those things, if they have a bad day, it flits through their mind. And I was just wondering how that happened.
Well, if I were to be quite kind of introspective and really look into my time at JP Morgan, I would say that I was always moving a kind of job. I don't think I ever did exactly the same job for more than, say, 2 years. So I would look to do something else. So if I worked in IT support, I moved to a different department to support. So go from trading to banking, which both have their own sets of challenges. It sounds like it's the same job, but it isn't really. And so I think I was always looking to move, probably didn't really think about it because I was younger, but I was probably not quite comfortable with what I was doing because I ultimately wanted to be an archaeologist, originally. So I would say it was kind of always there, but not really that apparent to me. I wasn't really that aware of it. In 2010, I started doing night classes, learning ancient Greek again, which I used to study at university. And I loved it. I didn't find it tiring. After a long day at the office, you'd think going to learn ancient Greek in a night class is the last thing you want to do. But when I was learning, it like used a different part of my brain, so I didn't feel too tired. And so that kind of made me think, well, like, why am I doing that? Waste of time. But
that's what you were interested in.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was lots of fun. And then I was always looking for management jobs as well because I felt like that was what I was good with, dealing with people. So maybe that's the best way of doing it. But I think to actually leave the firm, and it's a big step because JP Morgan's a very generous employer. I don't just mean financially. I mean, benefits and various things. And it was a big step, but I realized that, in all honesty, once I hit 40, I thought, is this really what I want to do until I'm 65 or 60 or whatever age? And so I was around about 40, I moved to this controls job I mentioned. And once I started doing that, it was more the kind of work that I thought I would want to do at JP Morgan. And when I ended up doing it, I found it, I didn't find it interesting. In fact, and I feel bad about saying this. I'm sure none of my former colleagues are listening, but in that team. But it was the most boring job I'd ever done, and I hated it.
Well, former colleagues.
It wasn't their fault. But
had they been more interesting, it would have been less. No, let's not dwell on that. Okay, so you hated your job. And you were bored.
I did actually, yeah, and
you were 40, and you were 40, so
yeah. I mean, I would get. I don't know if this is ever discussed. You can edit this out, but I used to get that 3 a.m. wake up and can't get back to sleep. I would get that a lot. And I just thought.
Sorry, just to hover on that for a moment. We go everywhere in this podcast series, and
I wasn't sure. Good.
And actually, mental health, and what business does you, and sometimes success isn't even, which Kim was saying earlier. The success is a worse tutor than failure. That just it's actually important for people to hear that not everything's perfect, even if you're at bulge bracket investment bank. You were waking up in the middle of the night just because you couldn't bear the thought of your life being as it was, basically. Was that right? Or
That's probably the case for me. I'm not the sort of person who really talks about this kind of stuff very often. But I would say that just from a lot of friends, I mean, I meet up with a lot of friends who are either still working at JP Morgan or have left, but are still working in firms. I think a lot of people probably do feel in a similar way, but are willing to compromise just because it is.
Yes. That's the evil side of the whole thing, is that where it's like modern day slavery, right? It's like you give them their credit and their salary, you know, they have their loans, they have the obligations, and then they have this dependency on this job. And that's what makes what you did very, very impressive, actually. That's why we need to hear how you did it, because it is like it is tough to make a big change like that. You know,
you're very
we joke about 40, but 40 has the flip side, right? Like it's like that's when you need to sort of be stable and stuff like that. So, you know, that's the flip side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that you always hear about how, I think, is it once you hit 40, 45, you should be at your maximum earning capacity or something.
Nightmare.
I don't know what you're reading, but I'm glad nobody's told me about that stuff.
Well, I've gone the other way. But I think around about 20. I left JP Morgan. My last day at work at JP Morgan was in October 2020. So obviously that's pandemic time.
Yeah.
I went on sabbatical in 2019 in April 2019 for 6 months with my wife. We hopped in our car and went around Europe for 4 months.
Nice.
And so I think that gives you an indication that maybe, you know, if you're going on sabbatical, and I think my management thought this as well, was, you know, I'm not convinced this guy is sees himself in the firm for the next 5 years. But I always intended to return, actually. And so I did get back. I returned to work at the end of 2019, but my heart wasn't in it by then. And I couldn't, there were no jobs out there that were of any interest to me. And so I came to an agreement with the firm, and that was just around the time that the pandemic hit. And the firm was very kind, and then sort of delayed the departure date. But then, you know, I left in 2020, in October 2020.
Right.
But I think during that sabbatical, I kind of did see another world out there. You don't. Once you get slightly. I felt I got slightly institutionalized at JP Morgan, having been there 18 years. You know, you assume that working outside of such a kind of, well, it's a great name. It's a great. It's got a great reputation. Well, okay, it's got a reputation. It's got a great reputation amongst some. But it looks.
I mean, no. Let's be honest. Most people would say, "Wow," and most people say, "Wow." When you say, I work for JP Morgan. So, I mean, like, it has the wow factor, whatever.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I certainly, you know, I certainly believe that when I was there. I would say, I'm a lot more interested in history now. And so I'm very interested in the role of these big firms during the financial crash. So I'm not as if, I would say, it's fair to say I'm not as enthusiastic as I was when I was working.
Right.
But
you've done your research.
Yeah. But I think I did. I was looking at what I could do if I were to leave, and then I met. I had my co-founder is an old friend of mine who works in the publishing world, and so we were. I mean, I'd always been talking to him about sort of various kind of things over the years, and then our conversations got a little bit more serious in the summer of 2020, talking about what was a potential business opportunity.
Okay, and then how did it happen? Like, what actually?
Well, so we have increasingly seen, particularly in history and parts of the fiction world, is that publishers are less interested in, or have fewer resources to be able to dedicate to many historians. They've got the big name authors that they'll throw all their publicity at and marketing campaigns, but for other authors, they'll write the book, they'll have their book launch, and they'll get a few podcasts or with mainstream media, but that, if they're lucky, and otherwise that's that. And so what we were talking about doing was creating this company where you would be able to help promote the work in a traditional format, right? I.e., magazine, website, and podcast, and you're showcasing the author that way. And so if an author signs up to us, they have a platform with us, and then that's what we're there for. We're there to help promote them. So they'll always have access to our magazine, our website, our podcast, if they've got a book out. But we also don't ignore their backlist titles. So we'll do book of the month for a fiction author who had a book out 5 years ago, and that'll be a book that was successful at the time, or was a great book at the time, maybe didn't get as much interest as it should have, and we help promote that way as well. So that was really why, because increasingly publishers are less interested in promoting many of their authors, and we also thought we could help publishers as well. So often publishers maybe don't want to dedicate resources, they can use us, and we will help promote authors that publishers recommend to us. So that's the idea. That was the kind of rough idea.
Where does the revenue come from? Is it advertising revenue, or is it traditional publishing business?
It's a bit of both. We're stretching our revenue over various different ways. So predominantly, we get our revenue through authors and our authors, publishers, and the magazine. So authors will pay us a fee, and that's how we therefore.
For promotion, like you're going to help promote me, and here's a fee. Okay, in promotion.
So if you go on our website, we've got author platforms, and so that's maybe, Richard, where you saw Robert Lyman's platform, is that they will pay us. We then create their platform for them, and then they'll write articles which we'll put on the platform, and then we promote, or we'll put them on the website when they're on the magazine when the book is published, to help capitalize on that publication date. We publish that the magazine consists of articles, short stories. I'll get to the revenue in a sec, but the magazine consists of articles, short stories, and interviews. And they're all with authors who've got a book out at the time of, or roughly the time of publication of the magazine, and it comes with a book review. So the idea is that as the reader reads an article, they read the review and think, oh, okay, that looks interesting, I'll buy the book. So that's the theory behind it. So that's how it helps the author. We get our revenue from authors, from publishers. We get our revenue from the magazine subscribers.
So it's a subscription based.
Yes, it's a subscription. So I should have mentioned that, shouldn't I?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, look, there's different models. I mean, the publishing is either subscription based or advertising based usually.
I mean, no one else is doing what we're doing. I mean, it's called the company is called Aspects of History. It could be aspects of science fiction. It could be aspects of we just we just haven't branched out, but
that's a good idea.
We also promote that we sell through Amazon itself. So when we put that on promotion, we get a huge number of sales from that side of things. And then also we're always looking at. So are you familiar with Substack?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Yes.
So we're on that as well. These are the various different ways of that we're getting our revenue.
And does it work? And can you put some numbers on it, like numbers of traffic or revenue or like readers? I don't know what you measure, but how well you do, because you're quite new. So we're not expecting you to be in the billions, although if you are, congratulations. But
yeah, no, we're not quite there yet. We get the majority of our hits on our website come through organic searching, and I've found increasingly we have most of our social media presence through Twitter, because that tends to be where all the history sort of traffic tends to be. But I don't. Whilst we get traffic from Twitter, don't see as much as I guess I originally expected. We get far more organically through search engines, and obviously we need to make sure that our website's SEO is good as a result of that. But for our magazine, we get around about we have about 3,000 subscribers to the magazine itself.
Wow, that's impressive.
And then when we put it on promotion with we get very high renewal rate. So once people subscribe, they stick with us. We offer, it's very cheap, I should say. Or that's the wrong word. I should say very.
It's great value. It's great value.
Yeah. What is the excellent value?
So for a 1 year's subscription, it's 6 issues. So we publish every other month. That's $9.99 dollars or £9.99.
So about $12 or $13 or euros for us.
$9.99. We do the same.
Oh.
Yeah, $9.99 and £9.99.
Okay.
And then obviously we sell issues individually if you want. But that's what our idea is behind, is to retain our customer base by making the subscription as reasonable as we can, and that helps with our numbers, and so that attracts more authors. More
that's what they care about. And so are you like the main, like you said you're the editor? So
I edit the magazine,
reading,
yes.
So you're like reading the books, and you're reading the books,
no,
and writing the book reviews or
no. I'm not. I'm editing the magazine. I will do many of the interviews, and therefore I'll depend on the author. I might just do I'll do a transcript of the conversation and put that in with the highlights of the interview, or I'll write it more long form if the subject I'm quite passionate about. So for example, last month I interviewed a ancient historian who has written a book about Homer and the Iliad. And so I love that kind of stuff, and so I'll write a little bit more of a flowing interview that you might see in a magazine or something, in the New York Times or something. Or if it's quite a punchy, fun interview, we'll just do a sort of Q&A that again you would see in a supplement of a newspaper interview. And then I will have the authors. Obviously, they all write their own articles. And then book reviews. We've got a number of contacts in the world who either will contact me, or I'll have some of the authors might write a review. So if they're an expert on the subject, they may be interested in the book, and so
I guess you never have a situation where this author has paid money and is supposed to be promoted, and the book review comes in and. Sorry, our book reviews always. I haven't read a lot of books. When I think about it, I don't think I've read a lot of book. But now that I think about it, they're almost always positive, aren't they?
Yeah, well, so that's a very good question. And you might well go, well, your job is to help promote these authors, isn't it? And so your reviews aren't going to be critical. I have never ever directed a reviewer to change their review to make it more positive.
Right. So it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. This conflict of interest just never happens.
What I would say,
or you just that's it. I mean, whatever.
Well, I would say that I do try and curate the magazine in such a way that we're talking. We do include. I think we have a kind of a slant historically. It's interesting you mentioned that title, Richard. And because I've stumbled into the history world And this is answering your question, Kimon. I've stumbled into this kind of history writing world that is very political. And
I didn't know that. I didn't know
There's a
that.
huge
Neither did
huge
I.
debate.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yes.
About what? So I am a fan of history, and but I am not
Me
aware.
too, and I didn't know about it. Yeah, it seems like Richard is well up to speed.
Yeah, well, I mean, unusually, but
Well,
no,
well,
but
it's
no,
that-
maybe you explain, please.
Well, you know, everyone's got their own perspective, you see. So,
but on what? On the way things were, what the interpretation?
the way
is?
I think that how history is
interpretation.
interpreted, how it should be written.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I
And
think
it's
often,
part of the culture wars, and like you've got people like Jordan Peterson, and you've got people like so you've got like public intellectuals, or very high profile people saying that the historical establishment is dominated by postmodernist Marxists who just want to rip the system down, and that it's not that nothing he ever says has some merit, but they set up the people they disagree with as being this sort of cult who they attack. And then, of course, it tends to polarize because people, I don't want to say who was first. And so it's particularly the history of empire, the history of the British Empire has become a lightning rod in British politics where, people aren't allowed, depending on who you are and where you are, people aren't allowed to express certain points of view. And the reason I came across Oliver's website was that I was reading background on someone whose book I'd read. And books can be interesting without you agreeing with them. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd to think you have to sign off on everything. And the book was very important and influential and controversial. And anyway, your guy Lyman works in the military academy, doesn't he? Work at Sandhurst, which is the British.
He may have lectured. I don't. He certainly graduated. He's a former army officer. He writes. He's just got a new book out actually, which is I'm reading at the moment because I'm going to be interviewing him with his co-author, who's the former head of the army. And he wrote a book a couple of years ago about the war in the Far East, called A War of Empires. So he's well used to this kind of empire question.
And what's your slant? What's the slant of aspects of history? You said you've got a slant.
Well, I could give you my view. Many of the authors who have platforms on aspects of history may well disagree with me, and fine by me. I'm very happy. I've just been editing a conversation I had with a contributor on the podcast about the Parthenon marbles. So the Elgin marbles, Kimon, you know all about this.
Kim was Greek. Kim was Greek heritage.
He knows. He commented the name. Don't you?
I'm a huge fan of Kimon, the 5th century general. Yes.
The general, exactly.
Yes. So that debate, actually, I don't think.
But what is the debate? I know the story, but I don't know what the debate is.
Well, the debate is around these marbles that are from the Parthenon, from the Acropolis, that sit in half of them are in half are in Athens, half are in London in the British Museum.
Right, exactly.
And the argument is that should they be returned or not?
Yeah.
And now I've just been editing a podcast with a contributor where I am making the argument that they should go back to Athens.
Yeah.
And he is strongly arguing that they should remain in the British Museum.
Now, and what's the argument for is it true that the argument is we'll take better care of them? Is that what?
Well, you asked that question at an interesting time.
Because it's an awfully condescending. No, because it's I was literally just in Knossos recently. I have a house in Crete. And I was there, and I can't remember. You'll know. I don't know who, but he was British as well. The guy who ran the whole site and that whole thing. But anyway, that was part of that was the thing then. And obviously the Greek woman who I had somebody, I was on a tour or something like that. She was up in arms in the British thing. And there was British people. It was hilarious. There was English people on the tour with me. And they said, we took good care. We take good care. We know how to take care of something. Like they were defending the thing. It was hilarious. It was thing. It was exactly this. But I mean, I don't even think, how is it possible Like it seems so obvious to me, and it's not my Greek patriotism. And this is like, okay, we acknowledge this is yours, give it back. Like, what's the
Well,
problem?
I think, it is okay. I'm going to now start arguing against my own position.
Okay.
But I think the argument that against their return is, and their remaining in the museum, in the British Museum, is that these marbles go beyond Greece. They are almost a symbol of the kind of Western civilization. How ancient Greece is so important from the dramatic
The development
plays.
of Western civilization, basically.
Yeah, exactly. From the Homeric period all the way through to the 5th century, to the Roman Empire. It's all core part of who we are. And so therefore the British Museum, this is the argument, is that the British Museum it's called the British Museum, but it's a museum for everyone, not just the British, despite it being called the British Museum. So that's the argument.
Right.
Now I think
the fact that it was taken from Greece.
yes. Again, proponents of their retention in the British Museum would argue that they were legally taken. I think the question is dubious, yes, but they would disagree.
Okay.
But I think
I'm not. It's so funny because I don't know. I'm like completely ignorant, like to the details of this whole thing.
The majority of people in Britain, I think it's 59%, think they should. I know we're in the danger of turning this into something else. You should be listening to my podcast for more on this. But
exactly.
But Richard, I don't think this is part of the political turmoil that's going on in history at the moment. I think actually it's a side issue. It predates the culture wars by about 200 years. Yes. So I don't think the Elgin marbles are part of this. But there is an argument that many historians, particularly in academia, embark on projects because they have a kind of a preconceived idea of...
They want to prove something.
Yeah, exactly. Which you probably is not the best starting point. So I think Robert Lyman would argue that I think Caroline... Elkins is I think Robert's position is that she started off from a position that the British Empire was I'm generalizing, paraphrasing, and she would probably disagree with me, my language, but I think Rob might say that her position took a political slant to begin with, i.e. the British Empire is a evil or a bad thing and did a lot of bad things. I think the answer, if you ask me, is that it's a little bit more nuanced than good or bad. Empires throughout history have behaved badly, well, indifferently, imperfectly, well. They've done given great benefit to countries they've colonized. They've also done great harm. But it's not almost not a helpful good bad argument. It's not complicated for that.
Well, we'll put a link to your podcast with about this in the notes with this podcast. Also, there's an excellent interview by William Dalrymple and his co-host of Caroline Elkins because there's a smash hit podcast series called Empire, and they interview her, and it's obviously both of them having sort of Indian. They're more sympathetic to the Indians than the people who think that the Indians were jolly lucky to be colonized by the Brits. That they're not anyway. But
it's funny because I view it. I think because I studied ancient history and empire all over that.
Exactly.
Athenian
I know exactly
Empire,
what you're gonna.
Yeah, Spartan Empire, Alexander the Great. Empires just happened. They were. There's no point in saying was it good or bad. All political entities, if they get powerful enough, particularly not as benefited us in how enlightened we are. We don't see that kind of thing now, or do we? But all political bodies, if they gain enough military strength, will start looking at their neighbors and start wanting. It doesn't matter what. It's humanity. That's what it is. That's my view.
Anyway,
I think it's a really great point. I mean, about the fact that if you look through, the only difference here is that it's more modern. Because that's and so I guess because it's and I'm not at all aware. I don't know any of these arguments about the British Empire, whatever. I don't even know actually what you guys are talking about, but I am aware of the fact that the ancient history empires, and there's so many of them, and they were good, as you're saying, they were good and bad. Lots of evil, horribleness connected with a lot of like positive benefits that were given to the people. So, and they are like, these are just like, yeah, focusing on historical facts makes a lot more sense than trying to go at it from I want to prove something.
I think Tom Holland put it best recently when he was again on my podcast. Sorry for the shameless plug.
Second link in the show notes.
Yes. And I think he says he said that if you are looking at the past for some kind of moral judgment for your present, you're looking in vain. The arc of history does not trend towards justice. So I think that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, I know.
Talking of justice, sorry, this is going to be a massive segue.
Talking of justice, I'm now curious how he's going to do this. Okay.
How did your wife feel about you abandoning the job in JP Morgan and setting up a highly risky venture? I mean, you don't have to answer that directly, but
no, I'd be more than happy to, because
are you? It doesn't sound like you're independently wealthy.
No.
Although
I'm
you
not.
sound as your voice and your name looks as though you might be the sort of person who is, because you've got this sort of posh army, for a British ear, it's a posh army, public schoolish type accent, and everything. But it's quite a jump to do what you did, because I would imagine that even if you're covering your costs, this is not El Dorado. This isn't spewing out cash in Facebook type quantities, is it? And it probably never will.
If I move my camera, you'd see all the $100 bills that I've but you're right. It's not. It's a living, but it's not. It's not the salary I was on at JP Morgan, and so my wife. I think that my wife has been incredible, because I think one of the reasons why is that she saw me. She was with next door to me when I was waking up at that 3 a.m. Time slot. She saw me getting back from work, and she was with me on that sabbatical when we were talking about what we wanted to do, and she's been massively supportive. My wife's got this extraordinary setup. Actually, she runs her own business where she consults with other firms. And she is very successful at it. She's hugely successful. She works 6 months of the year during the winter months. So she's about to start to resume again with a contract in next month. And she will work through till April, and then she will stop. And then all summer not be working.
Sounds like we should interview her.
Yes, I was about to say.
How did you do that?
Share a link. I mean, obviously, we don't want to talk too much about we're already running out of time, so it might be a topic. But do share a link so anyone who's curious can look at her website or whatever. But so basically, you had a supportive partner, and for anyone listening,
I couldn't have done it without her.
Yeah, for anyone listening, remember these words: that if your husband or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever is not on board, it can be very, very tough to do what you've done.
I mean, I think I'm not very good at talking about my feelings, but she was very good with me in that sort of 2018, 2019 period. Yeah.
Choose wisely.
Yeah, she's Persian as well. So Kimon, she probably would be uncomfortable with your first name. But for listeners, Kimon,
I don't know how you feel about talk about these other things about history. I don't know if we're going to go like bringing the name back. Oh my God!
Sorry,
well, I love Alexander the Great.
Segue back to where we were.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, no. We do. I mean, it seems like we're all fans of history, so obviously, like that's nice. It's a nice thing. I think it's a great look. At the end of the day, you're doing something that you like. Isn't there anything more important than
I
doing
love
something
what I
that you
do.
want to do. Who gives a crap about how much money I mean, obviously you need them. I mean, fortunately, it sounds like
Well,
your
one
wife
thing I
also is makes money, so you're probably fine. And like, does anything else really matter? I mean, like, really?
I mean, Kimon, I think you're absolutely right. One thing I would say is that I came off the back of as I've droned on about 18 years at JP
Yeah,
Morgan. So that provides a certain amount of security.
right.
I've got a pension. I've got
Sure.
a lot of historians, who I help. Maybe they don't have. I don't know.
No, I'm sure they don't. I mean, that talk about it's, as you said, archaeologists, but I can't believe the historians are too far behind the archaeologists. So, it's
But
definitely,
what you've done, I mean, there are lots of people who start off doing a job for money and paying the rent and the mortgage or whatever, and they think one day I'm going to jump ship and do what I really want to do, but they never ever do. And
yes, good
what's
point.
nice about your story is that you actually did make the jump, and you've made a success of it, because quite often it ends in disaster. People quit and they set up their yoga school or whatever, and it doesn't work, and then they don't have a job or a yoga school. And I guess you can take great pride in that. And maybe where is it? Where is it going? Do you sort of, you mentioned you could do things other than history, but that probably wouldn't do it for you. You wouldn't want to be doing aspects of biotech, because that wouldn't get you out. You might start waking up in the middle of the night if you were doing aspects of biotech. So could you go even deeper into history and start doing events like other podcast companies do, or stuff like that? Do you think, or what?
Yeah, we've started doing that kind of thing. We have a short story award that will be announced shortly. We have last year we did a unpublished novel competition. So we're always thinking of ways that that are interesting and can help with more revenue. The events, it rather depends. There are many you would may be surprised at this, but there are many kind of festivals and that kind of thing that are currently very successful. So you have to think, I think we'd have to think a little bit carefully about how we would make ours a bit more distinctive. And there are other very successsul historians themselves. You mentioned William Dalrymple's successful podcast. There is another one run by James Holland that has branched from podcast to actual festival on an annual event where people go for a weekend and so we need to think a little bit like that, I think.
I'm not surprised, actually. That sounds like a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
you get a bunch of people that are interested. Yeah, absolutely. They're all going to be drinking and talking about ancient history and all kinds of stuff. It'd be kind of fun, I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of people would be really into that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people are very inspirational because they're coming up with these great ideas. And I think we just have to think a little bit about that.
And you won't have any problem getting speakers. Like, that's like the normally part of the problem you have with things like that is like, who's going to, but like, I'm sure because you have historians, you've got tons of potential speakers, basically. I guess they're interesting, like good ones. Not like we go to business conferences, they suck. I mean, people can't, they're so boring and they can't do it. And these people have like interesting material and they're probably inspirational as well. Because you can probably pull like really good people, like relatively good people.
Absolutely. I mean, even for the magazine, Kimon, I mean, the magazine that we produce has that there are very few great historians who haven't written for us.
Yeah, see, that's awesome.
It's extra. I mean, these are historians who are hugely well respected globally, and they're writing for my magazine. I can't believe
that's awesome. I think you should. I definitely think you should do the event where you have these guys give their interesting, funny, cool talks about various quirky historical things. That would just I guarantee you that would be a really, really like. Sorry, Richard, you're.
Oh, I was going to say that we haven't. I mean, wasn't sure whether to talk about it on the podcast or not. But the New Books Network itself has a big chunk of historians, and I think that we might be able to help promote it or somehow work together. And Marshall Poe, who founded it, is a former Harvard historian, and it's not. We don't do exactly what you're doing. We don't do a magazine at all, but I think there is there is definitely common ground. So it's something that we could chat about. Or
History Palooza.
Well, we are always very collaborative. We're very keen to work with other organizations and groups, and we do. And so we'll never say no. We're very friendly with our content as well. You know, we're very happy to share content depending on where it's going. But I don't think we've said no yet. It's our historians' content. It helps us to promote them.
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind it. So always very keen to collaborate.
Well, after we publish this, I'll there's no rush. I mean, I'm the oldest person in this room for sure, and I've still got a few years left. So I'm not sort of burning through to get this done before my next birthday. I did ask a question we didn't get to the answer to where you're going to take this. Do you have like a vision, or is it just iterative? You do one thing, you see how it works. If it works well, you do more of it, because you don't have to answer to investors or anything like that, do you? No. I want to increase our magazine readership, and that's my main. That's really what I want to achieve most out of it. And I'm finding that quite difficult. It's a challenge. I mean, it's growing, and I'm happy with the numbers, but I want to grow it more. And it's just trying to work out the best way of doing that. Time for me is always a challenge. I've got to edit the magazine, the podcast, as well as all the other stuff, that gets in the way. And what I want to do is spend a week where I just kind of work out the best way to do the research and work the best way to try and increase the number of subscribers we've got to the magazine. That's really what I should be doing, and I don't spend as much time on that as I should. Well, if any of our listeners in fact, if anyone wants to get in touch, how should they do that? If someone's listening, saying, I know how to boost sales of history. Yes. Oh, that would be, what should they do? Email editor@aspectsofhistory.com. I'm on the Twitter as well, and but email probably the best. Yeah, we'll post all the details in the fantastic in the note. Now, is there anything that we haven't asked? Keeman, is there any other question, or should we move towards? No. So I've really enjoyed listening to this. So, just is there anything that we haven't asked, or something important about the whole story that you think the listeners that you're planning to share that we haven't got to? Were you asking me? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, I was worried that I hadn't talked enough about the kind of business side of things. Do you think I should have covered that more? There's no should. I think this has been very interesting. I've enjoyed this, and I think the listeners will enjoy it as well. And I think you're going to help us get those Elgin marbles back where they belong. Yes, well, now that I've understood, now that we've taken the time and I've really understood the issues and the arguments. Well, you will have once you've listened to the podcast, of course. But yes, well, once you've listened to that, you might decide I did a rubbish job of putting my side of the argument, and I might have undermined the position. But yeah. No, we could have gone through all those steps, but we try to make it a free flowing conversation, and I think. Good. We can't. It's better. My dad, who's sadly dead now, used to say the best is sometimes the enemy of the good, and maybe there was an optimal version of this, but I think this was pretty good, and I hope as we said before we started, if we've enjoyed ourselves. Yeah, exactly. I've enjoyed myself, so screw everybody else. and dear listeners, please get in touch with your people. I think it is more interesting to listen to people who are interested in what they're talking about. So yes, well, thanks very much indeed, and thank you for being here on the podcast. Thank you for having me.